Hey, it's Jeff Bergman with SAT Success Secrets. Today in this video, I want to show you how to maximize your vocabulary for the sentence completion questions on the critical reading section of the SAT. I want to show you how to get as many questions right on the sentence completions that you possibly can given your current level of vocabulary. Now, two kids with essentially the same level of vocabulary can get very, very different results on this section. And I've worked with kids tutoring kids for about 13 years now, directly one-on-one, and I've seen kids do this the wrong way and get as few questions right as you could possibly imagine. And I've seen kids do this the right way and get as many questions right as you could possibly imagine, or even more than you think that kid would get right. So these methods are very, very powerful. Now I'm about to show some questions on the screen. It's 8 sentence completion sections from one critical reading section of an official SAT practice test. The questions are going to be relatively easier at the beginning, and then medium, and then relatively harder. So follow along. Know that the easy ones are going to be so easy for you, you won't really need the method. And some of the harder ones might be so hard that the method won't help you if you don't know enough words. But pay careful attention to how I'm answering the questions. Every time a question comes up on the screen, pause the video, try and answer it yourself, then restart the video and follow along with me and watch how I do it, and then restart the video for the next question. Pay careful attention to how, before I look at the answer choices, I'm always looking to see what the word in the blank has to mean, or if it's two blanks, then what the words in the blank have to mean. And pay attention to how I can almost always find a strong clue to what the words mean in the sentence itself, and sometimes even the exact definition. And then pay attention to how, when there's two blanks in the sentence, I don't work the two blanks at once. First, I look at the one that's easier and use the process of elimination for one of the blanks, and then I go back with the remaining choices and do it again for the second blank. And that's how you can get as many questions right as you possibly can. All right, enough of me. In a minute, I'm going to show the first question. Pause the video, try it yourself, restart it as I mentioned before, and I'll talk to you again later when it's done. All right, question 1. Years of blank lifting of heavy furniture had left him too blank to be able to stand erect for long periods of time. All right, so when a sentence has two blanks, we want to work each of the blanks separately almost every time. And the first thing we want to do is decide which of the blanks is easier to work. And you can take a look and decide for yourself, but it looks to me like in this sentence, the blank that's easiest to work is this one. And we don't want to look at our answer choices yet. We want to decide on our own what word or phrase would we put in the blank. And there's something in the sentence that's always going to give us a clue. So here we have the lifting of heavy furniture had left him too blank to be able to stand erect for long periods of time. And we know the word in that blank has to mean something like physically disabled or worn down or something like that. So now we're going to look at only the second word in each choice, and we're going to cross off the ones that don't work, that don't mean something like physically disabled or worn down. So, of course, your level of vocabulary is going to come into play here, whether you know what these words mean. But I can tell you that dumbfounded does not mean physically disabled. Distracted does not mean physically disabled. Hesitant does not mean physically disabled. Debilitated, if you know it, you know that that means something along the lines of physically disabled. And eminent does not mean physically disabled. So for this sentence, just by looking at the second blank, we pretty much know our answer. But that's not going to be true for all of the sentences. It's an easier sentence. So first, before we 100% decide, we want to check the first word in the answer choice to see if it works in the first blank. And we could say that the word in this blank has to mean something like hard or heavy. Years of heavy or hard lifting of heavy furniture had left him too physically disabled to be able to stand erect for long periods. And strenuous The answer choice in D certainly works. So we've confirmed D is our answer. All right, question 2. Canadian Lynn Johnston was named Cartoonist of the Year in 1985. The first woman to be so blank. Now, before we look at the answer choices, we want to pick a word on our own that would work in that blank. Now, she was named Cartoonist of the Year. And being named Cartoonist of the Year is like getting an award. We could certainly say that the word in that blank should be awarded. Sentence would certainly work if we said Canadian Lynn Johnston was named Cartoonist of the Year in 1985, the first woman to be so awarded. So let's cross out the words that don't mean that. Inspired does not mean awarded. Entrusted does not mean awarded. Honored means awarded. Employed does not mean awarded. And refined does not mean rewarded. Again, this is an easy sentence. When the sentences are easy, you probably don't need to so explicitly go through the process like this, but when you learn the process, it really extends your vocabulary as much as you can. Now, I will say this. You do have to know what these words mean, even though these are relatively easy words that you're much more likely to know than some of the words in some of the later sentences in the section. But let's just say you didn't know some of the words. You'd have to cross off the words that you know don't mean it, and then you have to say which one of these answers is better. And here's a rule of thumb. If you can cross off 3 answer choices, then you should just pick, even if you're not sure which one is better. And if you can cross off only 2 answer choices, then you have to say to yourself, do I have a strong gut? And if no, then leave it blank. All right, question number 3. Because the photographer believed that wild animals should be blank only in their various natural surroundings, she blank often in her career. Now, the sentence has 2 blanks, and we're going to work 1 blank at a time, if we can. Once in a while, there's a rare 2-blank sentence where you have to work the both blanks together, but usually not. We're going to say which one is easier to work. And here, I think it's the first one. So we want to see, before we look at the answer choices, what word or phrase would we pick to go in the blank. Another way to say it is, we have to decide what does the word that goes in that blank have to mean. And there's almost always a word or phrase in the sentence that gives you a clue, if not the outright answer. This person is a photographer. So we could say, because the photographer believed that wild animals should be photographed. Photographed would work well there. Should be photographed only in their various natural surroundings. She blank often in her career. Or perhaps we'd say shown or photographed. So let's go through. Now, this sentence is a little harder. Of all of the words in the choices, now we've got our first word that on average you might not really know. And that word is depicted. But look at what's in the middle of it. Picked, like picture, like photograph. So you'd say depicted. That might mean photographed or shown. Let's leave it in. Now here's something that's very important. If you're not sure, you're still leaving it in. You only want to cross off the ones at first that you're pretty sure are wrong. Displayed, that sort of means shown, so we're going to leave it in. Captured doesn't work. That's not photographed or shown. Photographer wouldn't want to capture wild animals. A photographer would not want to domesticate wild animals. That's not photographed or shown. And represented, that could be shown. That could work. So now, unlike the first question, when after we worked one of the blanks, we only had one choice, so we're almost positive that had to be it. Now we've got three choices that could work. So let's look at it. Because the photographer believed that wild animals should be photographed or shown only in their various natural surroundings, she blank often in her career. So if she's a photographer and she thought the animals should be photographed only in their natural surroundings, she'd have to go to where they are, because presumably she doesn't live where a zebra or a lion lives, or a bear, or whatever. So a word means pretty clear means traveled. So let's just check the others. She spoke, that makes no sense. That's not right. And publicized, that also makes no sense. It doesn't have to do with go there. So we know that the answer's A. Even if you didn't know what depicted meant, you'd still have to pick that answer choice. And that's really important. That's a great example of how you maximize the vocabulary that you know in order to get answers right on the sentence completions, even when you don't know for sure 100% the word that goes in the blank. Question number 4. Folk painter Grandma Moses has become such an enduring icon that many consider her blank of America. Now, what you want to do is decide before looking at the answer choice, what does the word that you're going to put in the blank have to mean? And again, there's almost always something in the sentence that's a clear clue or pretty much the answer. And here we have the word icon. You could put the word icon in the blank there. You could certainly say, folk painter Grandma Moses has become such an enduring icon that many consider her an icon of America. Now, that doesn't make 100% sense, but it's pretty close. Now, you might say, okay, Jeff, that's all well and good, but I don't know what icon means. Let's look at it that way for a second, and then I'm going to come back and do it the other way. Let's suppose you don't know what icon means. Then you're going to have to look at these various words and decide whether they make any sense at all. And here's how you decide. She's a folk painter, and she's become such an enduring something that many consider her a blank of America. Well, innovator doesn't really make sense. Now, I could see how you might pick it if you knew something about Grandma Moses and thought that she might be an innovative painter, meaning that she had a new style of painting. And I have no idea whether she did or not, to be honest. You might say, oh, I guess maybe innovator because I don't know what the word icon means and I got to pick something. But that would be the only context in which it makes sense. And it doesn't. It's not the answer. Now, an emblem. Do you know what an emblem is? Now, obviously, if you know what icon means and you know what emblem means, you know the answer to this question right away. Let's assume you don't. They know that emblem is going to be one of those words that people are less likely to know, and you're less likely to know it. If you're not sure, you're still leaving it in. You only want to cross off the ones at first that you're pretty sure are wrong. Now, answer choice C. A successor is someone who comes next. That doesn't make any sense. A painter wouldn't be a successor of America. That'd be someone who follows America. All right, let's look at D, a detractor. So you're less likely to know the word detractor. You might know it. If you don't know the word detractor, you might recognize that it contains the word detract. And detract is to take away from something or to make it less valuable. And a detractor is someone who says something bad about someone or something. Now, if you didn't know that, you would leave this answer choice in. But if you know that, if you can figure out that's what detractor probably means, you wouldn't pick it, because why would a folk painter be considered a detractor of America? It doesn't make any sense. And a lobbyist. A lobbyist is a word that you either know or you don't. If you're going to try and figure it out because it has the word lobby, like the lobby of a hotel or an apartment building, and you've never heard of a lobbyist, then you really wouldn't know what it means. But a lobbyist is somebody who, at least in the American system of government, tries to get Congress to pass certain laws. And it does relate to the word lobby because I guess a long time ago they'd hang around in the lobby and wait for the congressman or something like that. But there'd be no way that a painter would be considered a lobbyist of America. So that's not it. So then you're left with the word emblem. But now let's go back and look at it the positive way. An icon, in the sense that they mean it here, is a symbol of something. And an emblem is also a symbol. And those words are very closely related in meaning. So that's why you essentially want a word that means icon to go in that blank. And the word that most closely means that is emblem, and B is the answer to 4. And again, that's how you maximize your vocabulary, because you can get this correct even if you don't know what icon means, which is really the key to answering the question correctly. And you don't even have to know the meaning of the word in the answer choice, as long as you can sort of figure out what they're talking about. All right, question number 5. Whether substances are medicines or poisons often depends on dosage. For substances that are blank in small doses can be blank in large. Now, this is a very particular type of sentence completion question with 2 blanks, because in this type of sentence, it's not that one blank is easier or harder than the other. It's that they're essentially represented positionally in the sentence. Here's what I mean. This sentence makes sense if we put medicines here and poisons here. And we'd read it this way. Whether substances are medicines or poisons often depends on dosage. For substances that are medicines in small doses can be poisons in large. And that's what it means. So remember, we did that because before we look at the answer choices, we want to have an idea of what does the word in the blank have to mean, and we know that almost always there's a very clear clue or even the exact definition in the sentence of the word that needs to go in the blank. So now we can check any blank first. We want something that means medicines or something that's like medicine in some way for the first choice, for the first word in each of the choices. So some medicine might be useless. We want a word that means medicine or medicinal or works like medicine. Now, while some medicines can be mild, mild is not the essential quality of medicine, so it's not this. Now, answer choice C, curative. Medicine is supposed to cure you. So that might work. We're going to leave it in. D, medicine can be harmful sometimes, but it's not the essential quality of medicine. I'm going to cross that out. And answer choice E. Just like curative medicine, the essential quality is that it's beneficial. That's why we call it medicine. We're going to leave it in. Now we're going to look only for C and E. We're going to look at the second word in each choice. We need a word that means something like poison. And a poison is toxic. This is the answer. A poison is not miraculous, so it's not E. All right. Question number 6. Critics dismissed the engineer's seemingly creative design as being blank. That is, underdeveloped and lacking in sophistication. We're going to look for a clue or a definition right in the sentence to what the word in the blank has to mean. And we can tell, essentially because it says that is, that we need a word that means underdeveloped and lacking in sophistication. We know that as we go on, the higher numbers of the sentence completions, the words are going to be harder. So a lot of times that means we're going to cross out choices that don't mean what we want them to mean. So underdeveloped and lacking in sophistication. You're less likely to know answer choice A, defunct. Now you might know it, but let's assume you don't for a second. And if you don't know the word, if you're not sure whether it means what you need it to mean, you leave it in. Let's even for a second assume that you don't know answer choice B, unorthodox. We'll leave it in. Now, simplistic you're likely to know or have a strong guess on. Simplistic looks like it has to mean something like simple, even if you didn't exactly know that. And certainly simple is lacking in sophistication. Looks like it might be our answer. Erroneous means wrong. We'll cross it out. Ambiguous, let's assume you know what ambiguous means. Ambiguous means unclear. That's not it, we'll cross it out. Now let's say that's as far as you can get. Let's say you got a strong gut that simplistic must mean something like simple, and that is certainly close to lacking in sophistication. And you didn't know what defunct or unorthodox meant. Even though you can only cross out two choices, you should definitely pick C, even if you don't 100% know it. It's an educated guess. Now, defunct means no longer in existence, and unorthodox means going against the grain or doing something in a way that's not usually done, something like that. Orthodox means strict and by the book, so it's not that. We know the answer is definitely C. All right, question number 7. The professor commented to other faculty members that Sheila seemed temperamentally suited to the study of logic, given her blank for blank intricate arguments. Now, the first thing we have to do is, before we look at the answer choices, we have to get our guess of what we think the words in the blank is supposed to mean. And almost always, there's a strong clue or even close to exact definition in the sentence itself. Take a second and see if you can find what that is. So the word in the first blank has to mean temperamentally suited. The professor commented to other faculty members that Sheila seemed temperamentally suited to the study of logic, given her temperamentally suitedness for blank intricate arguments. And you might not know what temperamentally suited means exactly, or you might. The word in the second blank has to relate to study. So we could say the professor commented to other faculty members that Sheila seemed temperamentally suited to the study of logic, given her suitedness for studying intricate arguments. Let's say the second blank is the easiest one to work for you, and we want a word that means something like studying. Well, influencing doesn't mean studying. Evading, you're less likely to know, so let's leave it in. Unhinging, less likely to know, so we'll leave it in for a second. Let's assume you don't know it. Following, obviously you know following doesn't mean studying. And analyzing. Well, analyzing is a word that means something very close to studying. When we analyze something, we study it. So we're going to leave it in. Now let's look at the other choices. I'm going to assume that you don't know some of these words, but that's because on the easy sentences, I want to assume that you know the word and cut right to the chase on it. In the harder sentences, the ones that are more likely to be harder for you, I want to show you what to do if you're not sure. So if you're not sure, you'd say, oh, maybe I don't know what pension means. I'm going to have to leave that in. Now, disregard, you probably know. Disregard doesn't mean temperamentally suited. So we'll cross it out. Now, if that's as far as you get, if that's as far as your vocabulary allows you to get, you might get this sentence wrong. Because when you look at the word bent, we often think of bent meaning bent over, that it's crooked, bent rather than straight. And that clearly doesn't work. And that's okay. This is sentence number 7. They know people are going to get these wrong. They generally go from easier to harder in the sentence completions. Although, of course, if it's easier or harder for you, depends on whether you know the words or not. But knowing any of the additional words here will allow you to get it. Evading does not mean study. It can't be that. Even though the word penchant is closely related to temperamentally suited, turns out that so is bent. There's a secondary definition of the word bent, which is a tendency to do something. And when we put it with the word analyzing, which is the word that most closely means study, we're going to pick E. All right, and question number 8. It's our last question in this section. When traveling near the sun, the comet Hale-Bopp produced a blank amount of dust, much more than the comets Halley or Hyakutake. I have no idea how to say it. It doesn't really matter. But here's the key. We want to say, what does the word in the blank have to mean? We want a clue. And if it produced much more dust than these comets, then it had to produce a great amount of dust. So what are the words that you're most likely to know here? Well, disposable. Something is disposable, we throw it away. We know that's not it. Now, if that's the only word you can cross out, you got to leave this blank. If you can only cross off one word or can't cross off any words, skip the question. Now, let's say superficial. Let's say you know it. Superficial means something on the surface. That has nothing to do with a large amount. Cross it out. Now, if you can cross off 2 answer choices, you want to say to yourself, do I have a strong gut on the answer? If you don't have a strong gut, leave it blank. If you do have a strong gut, pick it. Now, let's say, what's the next word that you might know? Let's say redundant. Redundant is like repetitive. Repetitive doesn't mean a very large amount. Now, when you cross off 3 answer choices, if you have no idea between the other 2, just pick one. You still have an educated guess. You definitely pick an answer and not skip the question. Now, both of the remaining answers here, they both have to do with large amounts. But voracious means eating a large amount or having a very great appetite. And that's not it. In prodigious, one of the meanings of prodigious is a very large amount. So that's the answer. Now, if we've gone through these sentences and you said to yourself, I just don't know enough vocabulary to follow along and I can never get this far, then you got to go out and get yourself a set of SAT vocabulary flashcards and study them. Make it your goal to learn 25 new words each week. If you have a couple of months to go before the test, it's going to make a huge difference. Obviously, if you have only a couple of days, it's going to make a very, very little difference. And if you have a couple of weeks, it'll make only a little bit of difference. But go out and do it. Studying vocabulary, learning more English vocabulary is only going to help you in the long run. I hope you can see as we go through this method for maximizing your vocabulary, that when you intelligently figure out what the word in the sentence has to mean by using the clues that are already in the sentence, and then you use the process of elimination to cross off the words that can't mean what you know the word has to mean, and leaving in any words if you don't know what they mean, and then waiting until the end and saying which one is better. That's the way to maximize your vocabulary on the sentence completions and to get as many sentence completion questions correct as you possibly can, given the level of vocabulary that you have. All right, so that's how you make the most of your vocabulary on the sentence completion questions. I think that you can get another 1 or 2 questions right, sentence completion questions right, on each of the 3 critical reading sections. So that would be another 3 to 6 critical reading questions right on your SAT, even if you don't learn another word, another vocabulary word before you take the test. Now, when you get 3 to 6 more questions right on the SAT, on the critical reading section, you're going to get somewhere between another 30 and 90 points higher on your critical reading score. And that's huge, just by learning the method. So go out, get some more practice tests, practice this a lot, and I'm sure it's going to help you. And I'll talk to you again later on.